Thank you all for coming down. This is a special work session for budget preparation for the fiscal year 2017-2018. We're going to jump right in. I'm going to ask before we get started, for those of you that did come down, since this is budget season, if you do have any comments over what has been said, I'm going to ask that you wait till after the meeting. Then I'll give you some brief moments, and I'm going to ask you, please, if you do have comments, to be brief. This is going to be a long process, but we also do want to make sure that if there is something that's important that needs to be said from somebody from the audience, that you do get that opportunity. So I want to make you aware of that. Again, thank you for coming down. Tonight we'll be covering the CIP 5-year plan and the library. Did you guys have any specific, or did you want the library to go first?
Well, were you ready? No, I'll go first. I kind of thought I was going to do that. So,
okay.
I'm going to go through the information you have in your packet. You had one sheet that just as a review on the deficit fund balances that was loose at the front. And with that sheet, it shows the history of the fund balances going back to June 2011 to the June this last year. Back in 2011, our deficit accounts were at $8,500,000 and have gradually gotten down to where this last year they were at $836,000. And out of that, the main funds that are in there that were those primary categories, ongoing deficits that we didn't have a way to take care of. The last two that were on there were the Recplex at a $191,000 deficit and the golf course $130,000 deficit. Debt service you see in there at $40,000. It had been, even though it didn't show as a deficit in previous years, it really was. It just wasn't seen as a result of having a lot of cash on hand from the battery company. What's Federal Mogul with the debt. They were making their payments, and we had a significant amount of cash ahead of that was paid in advance, or that we'd received in advance of the debt payments. So when we paid off the remaining debt there this last year, it allowed that category to come in and be something that you actually saw that deficit balance. But we're on pace for this year for as an example there, the debt service fund should end up the year closer to $200,000 of positive cash. And that's been something that over the course of the last few years we've been trying to get that back to that point. The majority of the rest of the projects are deficit accounts that you see on there are ongoing projects. The depot renovations is with the great room, and that at $85,000, we're going to be carrying a deficit there over the next couple of years. The group, the Friends of the Depot, has done a significant fundraising effort there, but the revenues that they're receiving, those were some donations to be done over the course of, I don't know, was that 2 to 3 years? So as those come in, we'll be able to bring that deficit down. But you do have to know that we do back that ultimately for anything that doesn't get paid off. We end up being bearing responsibility on it. The SMID was a timing issue. That was, we wouldn't normally have that happen, but somewhere with our accruals at the end of the year, we had to accrue back, or probably a revenue to this year that we had previously coded to last year that we paid out, would be my guess. Or I don't want to work in the world of accruals, but that was a timing issue, and that just, we received it in 17. It should have been for 16. Okay, so we paid something that regardless, it'll get worked out this next year, and we'll just give less money to the SMID. The others, Mazel is an ongoing project that we have revenues on hand to cover, just in a different account. The Division Street rent rise is one that we ultimately will pay off with TIF funds. We've already set up an internal loan and also have the option to go into going out to a formal debt with this bond issue that we're looking to do this spring instead of that internal loan for that to cover. And the others are all very similar. The community redevelopment is the Dresser Ram site costs that came into this year for engineering fees, et cetera, that we'd incurred last year, but will be paid for out of ultimately TIF when we wrap up that project. So we've made a lot of progress, and I think that's an important thing to celebrate as we move forward and to make sure we keep in mind. We have gotten a long ways down the road. With the accounts that are left, I mentioned the two primary ones that were some legacy deficits. The Recplex and Flint Hills Golf Course are scheduled to be paid off this year. So we shouldn't be carrying any legacy debts into the next budget year. Any deficits will be similar to what the majority of the rest of these are, the ongoing projects where it's primarily a timing issue between when a debt is incurred and when you have the payment mechanism on it occurring. So that's just a big thing I wanted to make sure that we paid attention to. I wanted to go through a couple of things from my budget presentation letter that I didn't get to last time that I missed. I mentioned with, and I'm not going to go too much, I'm not going to go line by line through this, but I did want to hit on a couple of things. I mentioned last time hotel motel tax was lower. Other revenue streams that are similar, local option sales tax and gambling revenues, we're seeing some of the same trends occurring there. Gambling revenues were up about 30,000 from previous years, 2 or 3%. Well, we're now calling those to go back to where their long-term trends have been because the revenues so far this year are back on that stream. Local option sales tax, we don't know how our true-up process will work. Part of the way with local option sales tax, something that's different with how that is done. They do an estimate of what a forward estimate for the new year based off of last year's collections. And the estimate numbers that they gave to us this year, they will largely live by in what they pay out. The only reason they will make any changes is if it's significantly different. They hold 5% of their estimated revenues based off of last year's collections in reserve. They will not likely make any change to our funding stream during the course of the year unless they are so far below revenue trends that they have to reduce that revenue stream. Now, the thing that can happen, though, as we move into a new year with local option sales tax, is last year we received, the current year, we received, I think, $350,000 for a true-up payment. Since Stephanie isn't here yet, I was asking you, but
I've been looking at way too many numbers.
I know I look at too many numbers too. We received $323,000 this year as a makeup, a true-up payment. Their expectation for about what that should be is in the $200,000 range. So last year our revenues were very strong, but we've also seen that be as low as like $14,000. So we can have a revenue swing of about $350,000, give or take, in a given year in local option sales tax. In fact, as they did their payments to us this year, they budgeted for us to have a reduction of about about $100,000 from last year's revenue. So they thought we were going to have a reduction as we moved into this year, based off of what they were seeing for trends. We had the Manor property sell this last year, which I think most people remember.
Yes.
There will be another $1.2 million payment that is expected to be made in this next budget cycle. What makes the most sense to me for how that gets used is with one of the projects that's coming up, most likely the Mount Pleasant Street Bridge that we've budgeted to have paid for with TIF funds, to apply it to that project and reduce the amount of TIF borrowing that we would do. It just, rather than pay off an old debt, I'd rather just reduce the amount of new debt that we incur. And that decision isn't here yet to be made, but it just, to me, it makes the most sense as we move forward and how we deal or address that.
Is there a penalty for us prepaying
Nope.
one of those bond issues?
I think that one, I don't know if that one in particular, Stephanie, we did refinance that, and it might be locked in for another couple of years, the Manor debt. Yeah, without looking it up. When we refinanced it, I assume it had a 5-year, so I bet that we would have a penalty if we tried to pay it off at this point. But it wouldn't keep us from paying one of the other debts off that's
Yeah, well, I was specifically referring to the manor
Yep.
because that question had come up.
Yeah. One of the projects that's not on the CIP for this next year's 5-year CIP is from this last year. So parking ramp, Washington and 6. With the parking ramp down at Washington and Maine, with the cost overruns on that rehab, we have less funds available than what we'd originally budgeted. And I think that we under budgeted the scope of the project for what should really be done at Washington and 6 anyway. We have about 30,000 left. Nick and his group put together 4 different cost estimates on that. A basic, you're gonna redo the entry into that and pave. That basic project looked to be about 115,000. 110 is what I had in there. There also had the ability to put some different stormwater improvements, some green, either permeable pavement or catch basins that would allow for water to be caught there. Those were projects that were more in the $180,000 price range. And I also asked Nick to look at what it would take to put a second level on there, have an entry off of 6 as well as Washington, one on each level. A project to do something like that was more in the $500,000 range, and I just don't see spending that money. I think it'd be a good project, but that's not what I have set up right now. What I'm recommending, and this project hasn't come to you, but I'm recommending that we pay for the base level to be done, use additional local option sales tax dollars to cover the shortfall between what we had budgeted and what it will take to get that done. Our cost drivers. We have a 5-year pay package with our unions, 2.25% annually. We have it set to where we have capped the increase in costs on health insurance at 5% annually, and that's built into the budget. Our retirement systems, IPERS, the percentage that the city is responsible for has stayed the same since about 2012. I'm not sure exactly the exact year. MFPRSI, police and fire, the 411 system has seen that percentage has gone up and down fairly dramatically over the years. Back in 2008, I think it was down at the 17% level, and it's been as high as 30%, or a little over 30%. This budget for this next year sees that percentage decline slightly from the 25.92% to the 25.68% amount. Property liability insurance is going up about 5% annually for us. We've budgeted in for non-union positions to be that same 2.25% increase, along with the transition table, similar to previous years, where those who are closer to the bottom of their range get a larger bump up to get up to the median point. I assume Venue Works will be one of the discussions that is held during the course of this year, and I encourage you to read through the notes that I have in there on that as we and think about what are we looking at this cycle. That we do have the option to send them notice. I think it's a 120-day notice if we were to desire not to continue that arrangement. But we don't have an answer for what we would do differently. Nor am I suggesting that they have done a poor job. I just want that out there as something that you can have as a perspective and think about as we go through this budget cycle. Kind of already mentioned the lost. When it comes to our utility rates, sanitation, we've budgeted to go up 25 cents for solid waste, the base fee. We've been going up 25 cents, and we fully expect that we need to go up 25 cents each year moving forward. The reason that I say that, the recycling fee is on schedule and on pace to go up 10 cents per month. That's included in that every year, and it did this year. The tipping fee out at the landfill is designed to go, or expected to go up $1 per ton every year, as it is this year. Those are the two major cost components, along with our own personnel costs, as we see increases there that impact what we have to do for rates and within solid waste. In regards to sewer and stormwater rates, the numbers that are presented to you or will be presented to you have a 3% increase, as we've done the last couple of years. Again, those are low. That's lower than the 9% that we were seeing for annual increases when we were first reacting to the combined sewer separation notice. But it's what we fully expect that we need to do as we move forward to be able to have ourselves in a position to try to do our best to pay for the mandated work that we have to do. Overtime for fire. It's in the notes. We budgeted in this fiscal year, $72,000 for overtime costs. We were at $170,000 last year, and we're very much on line to hit that figure this next year, or this year. We did increase overtime budget in fire control from 72 to 150 in the budget that's presented to you. Recplex operations. They've seen a shift in their participation in a couple of their leagues. Just a couple of teams here and there in different leagues. This last year they had one less tournament. This next year they see being fully booked. But that participation is impacted, at least in part. I can't say everything that impacts things, but having Fort Madison open a complex certainly changes dynamics of how our facility is used. To make a budget work there, what's being transferred over from hotel motel tax to support operations, we've been in that 35 to 40,000 annually that we've had to transfer over to support operations. We're looking to need to increase that to 70,000. That's a pretty good hit to the hotel motel tax fund, and one of the key drivers that made it difficult to be able to fund some other things out of hotel motel tax.
Can you elaborate on the reason, on the driver behind that going up so much?
We have lower revenues and we have the same costs. When you have fewer people who are, I don't know if you want to address that at all in terms of teams and participation, Eric?
We can a little bit. I'll talk more in our presentation, but just for instance, the total number of league teams, which is during the week, are slow pitch softball, volleyball, soccer, flag football. We've gone from 340 teams in 2014, 325 in 2015, and 300 in 2016. We have seen the Fort Madison open their recplex, and they have volleyball and softball, and that has seen some of the decline in those areas. Overall admissions in 20 14, there was 90,476 that attended the Recplex, 81,763 in 2015, and 76,217 in 2016. Some of that is due to a couple tournaments being canceled. That's a big impact. And just rain out, that's something we can't control. Or if they schedule it and then they have fewer teams than they expected and cancel the tournament ahead of time, that we're not able to reschedule, and then the league teams, that has an impact on it, so.
But that has, as we've developed a budget for this year, that has had a significant impact on how we've set aside funds. It's a change.
That's questions coming up just because we're entertaining some other things down the road.
Well, and I kind of wanted to point this out in regards to, as you start having talks about an indoor recplex. The numbers that you have on a new facility be very comparable with a new pool. Your new pool will typically do its best its first year, and things slowly go down, especially if someone else builds one in the vicinity. Then you see a significant change. I don't anticipate that if this indoor recplex goes in, that you're going to see another one open up in Mount Pleasant, but your best years are typically your first few years. And you can see a change as things go on and a facility matures over time. So as you think about different facilities, the operating costs may be at one level for a period of time, but you can see those change as time goes on. And if you're going to commit to them, whatever level you're committing to, you have that long, not just the initial situation, but the potential for what can happen over time. And you have to be cognizant of that with any decisions that you're making. But we're not going to, I mean, even with what a change like this is, we may not have to continue that over time. We may see that our numbers look to improve, but I don't want to budget on that. I want to budget on where we're at. It's still, when we look at what the Recplex does for the community, we see this as a very valuable input of funds because of what it does for the community. And this is one of the things that is a direct beneficiary of having a Recplex, is the hotel motel tax.
Right.
So, both the sewer department, Mr. Fitting, are requesting an additional staff person that he needs to address as he goes through his budget presentation, as well as then the street and sewer distribution system that Nick needs to address during his presentation about what they're looking to do. For Don's department, he's looking at a full-time position to bring on. Nick is looking for 2 part-time summer positions, that one in streets, one in sewer distribution system maintenance. So look for that from their departments. You're tasked with doing that. Behind my narrative, you had a couple of comparisons for how we look compared to other towns. This is for the current budget year, since I have no idea what people are looking at for taxes for this next year. The smaller comparison here, the first one, is just the community's 20 to 30,000 population. A couple of things that I'd note, the total levy where we sit is at 1594. The range for this subset is 1371 to 2073, an average of 1680 levy. One of the spots where we tend to be higher than the others is on our debt service levy at 380. We're above the average. So that's somewhere that we're looking over the next few years to be able to bring back down. That is for those who got to be a part of that process. And in 2012, as we were cleaning up deficit accounts, we ended up having to work through the 2011 debt issue that was backloaded through 2023, and then layer on the taking care of some of those deficit accounts, and then any ongoing projects we knew were going to have a higher debt levy to work through. So our plan is, as we get to that 2023 timeline where that debt issue comes off, to start to see us try to stair step down from that 380 level down to about $3 on a debt service levy. Something to note on here, because of the values, the taxable value per capita, where you see us at that 26,000 of taxable value per person in our community versus an average of 31,000 in that subset. Take a look at where the tax per person. We ask for an average property tax from each person in our community of $427. The average community is at $500. Only one of the communities in our subset is asking less per person within our community. And this is one of the hard things. If you have a low property value in your community, it really makes it difficult to provide a comparable level of service to what others are doing. And as you look at the next sheet, you get a better flavor of that. Here, with all the communities over 20,000, there's 22 of us. The average taxable value is 42,000 compared to our 26,000. That means they have 50% higher value than us to spread the revenues across. Only one community has a lower amount of taxes that they ask from per person out of this group. We are the second lowest tax on a per person basis out of the top 22 communities across the state. That's not what people look at, though.
No, it's not. But that is good information to,
But it's something to keep in mind, because to provide a level of service, you know, the way we have to do things in terms of, you know, when we do compensation, we are pretty much mandated to make sure that we're matching up with what our like communities are. And our like communities have a different ability to pay for it than what we do. So it's just it's good, bad, or indifferent. It's just what we have to deal with.
The debt service levy, 380 is supposed to be our max, is that correct?
That's what ours is.
Yeah, and how did that get set?
What we did was, when we had to, back in 2012, when we were dealing with our trying to refinance the debts, we looked at what it was going to take to refinance those debts and what property tax levy it would take to do that, and have it be consistent enough not to stop us from doing any work.
But it's not a legal requirement.
No, you can levy the amount necessary to pay whatever your debts are. And that's where you'll see.
That's why somebody's got $5
Yep.
here. Bettendorf, I guess.
But yes, that's the amount necessary.
Okay. Thanks.
The next couple of sheets are just a different way of looking at some comparisons between communities. These are, again, the communities in the population 20 to 30,000 are like or comparable communities. And you can see what the current year's budgeted expenditures are for each of us. The problem is that not all of us account for things the same way. Mason City, or I'm sorry, Muscatine, as an example, has they have an ambulance service, right? Yeah. But they budget for that as a special revenue, and it goes down in the enterprise fund as a service there. We don't do that. Some places operate their sanitation in their general fund. We do it in the enterprise fund. A lot of these places, I'd say Mason City is one. If you look at their column, on page 2, near the top, that other general government, they have a figure there of $4.8 million. That's a pretty big other.
Yeah.
But all of their employee benefits and all of their insurance costs are in that spot. At least I assume that's where all of them are, because they're not in their actual departmental budgets. So when you try to make a comparison between, say, the expenditures that their police department has and what ours does, you're not comparing the same, you're not making a true comparison. Because we try to fully account for our expenditures that are associated with the police department in the police department. And you'll see that there'll be different mixtures of what places do. So that, it just becomes really hard. This is something that you can use to give yourself some level of comparison between communities, but you also have to recognize that we don't all do things the same way or report things the same way. And so why do you put it in this? Well, anyone can go and look this information up. So you can go to the Iowa Department of Management and look up our information versus anyone else. We need to make sure that people understand, just because you can look and make a comparison between places doesn't mean you're getting a full picture of that true comparison.
Is there just to ask, is there a city that stands out that is in our group that does do business closer to what we do, that we have more of a apples to apples, that you know of off the top of your head, or?
No,
Okay.
no, because, I mean, everyone
Everybody's
has
doing
some
something that's unique to
nuance
their-
that's different.
Okay.
And really, what we're all being tasked to do is account for stuff. Some of this is things, again, like when it comes to solid waste, the same solid waste service can be talked about in terms of an enterprise fund, or you can decide you do want to have it in a general fund. I mean, those are decisions that each community is making, and neither one is right or wrong. They're just different ways of making a decision to
Preference.
report it. Within the other sheets, the next ones, something that I'd point out with what we had in here this last week for the gross general fund revenues, expenditures, and then the net. One of them that stands out as being way different is Venue Works, or the auditorium. And that really has to do, we have to record all of their expenditures on our books. We did not have high enough figures to do that last year. So at the end of the year, as we're booking their entries, we're ending up being well above what we had on our system. The net still works out the same. It's just we needed to increase on our books both the revenues and the expenditures to get to where we're showing numbers that are truer to what we have to do. Is that fair enough, Stephanie? And you'll see that as you look at the net, which is a third of those sheets, the general fund expenditures, net of grants and fees. Under culture and rec, near the bottom of the page on the auditorium, we're budgeting for the net to be $360,000, a little less than what the last couple of years have been. And it really is pretty difficult for us to know during the course of the year how that's going to happen. We end up booking all of their entries at the end of the year, so we don't have a really good flavor for how we're doing during the course of the year till we get those entries in. We get some of their financials, but we don't book any of it into the system until August or so. And moving on, did you have any questions on those sheets? Or did you want to highlight anything as you've had them? But
Looks like everybody's good.
So the auditorium expense, even though we have Venue Works working with us, is still up.
correct. Now, as the auditorium for us, if you go back and look at what our net cost to run the auditorium has been over the years, back in 2010, our net cost to run it was $320,000 or so, somewhere in that neighborhood. 2011 was close to the same, and that year might have been when it started to go down. We were down into the $290,000 range 2 years in a row. But when we were down at that lower net cost, we had a very skeleton crew. We had positions, one or two, maybe two positions that were open, that we weren't filling. And we were not doing, we had no one there that was available to do any type of scheduling.
Didn't we have city staff helping out during that process a little bit too? I want to say that we had.
I don't know about that. I just think that at that point, the person who was managing the facility that position had come open. Is that true? Or which positions was it that we didn't fill?
I mean, at the end, we just had 2 maintenance people there.
Yeah. And it,
Looking people were part-time and they were.
and we had, before that, we'd had 3 to 4, were we at 4 at one point there or no?
3 full-time.
3 full-time and then part-time. And then we were down to 2 full-time prior to us closing it down. So when we look at years where we were netting our costs below 300,000, we weren't staffed the way we needed to be. If we were to look at maintaining the staff level that we had back in 2011 and what our net cost was, inflate out with the change in employee costs that would occur with moving the salary matrix up, we'd be close to that 350,000 net cost range. It would be probably less than what we're doing with VenueWorks. So VenueWorks has not saved us any money. It hasn't cost us a tremendous amount of money, but part of the goal that we'd had was to try to maintain our existing expenditures with that contract. We've gotten a lot more entertainment than what we saw in that facility. We have fewer weddings. So that's a hard one to evaluate what's the right thing to look at moving forward with how the facility operates. I don't know if that's giving you enough background for that.
But looking at the anticipated budget then, on the auditorium, you're talking revenue of 656,000, and then expenses 919, so it's going to be a loss of about 267,000.
360,000.
I subtracted 656 from 919, am I doing that? Some pretty good numbers, although I flunked accounting.
If you do that, that's the right number, Bob.
So I don't know what you've done on those. She'd have to look in what,
That's all right.
we probably made. Oh, your net
Well,
there,
it's
there's
the-
a
it's the
difference.
other-
That's not what you're looking at.
Yeah, it's the other.
Because part of the revenues that we record in there is property taxes that we levy. We don't, so when any of the funds or any of the departments where we have property tax that we levy, they count as revenue on the revenue sheet, but if we net, that net sheet there is net of grants and fees. We're not trying to net out property taxes, because I want to show what's supported by property taxes on that net sheet. So it's not going to be, as you look at the revenues in a given department, when the revenues do include things such as property taxes. Not very many of the departments have that, but those that do aren't, that's not gonna be a true net out like that.
That's like $100,000, right?
Yep.
That's why that comes out that way.
Yeah.
I
And the
withdraw
library
my
is,
comment then at this time.
yeah, library is gonna be the same. We have a levy for
Yeah.
the library as well that wouldn't net out against their expenditures on that net sheet.
Thank you very
There is, just so you know, I mean, from what I'm getting, there is a growing concern with VenueWorks and the auditorium and how we're going to be able to maintain that in the future. That's concerned, I think.
Which is part of the reason I put in your notes,
Yeah.
the process for if you were to want to make a decision not to continue that. You do have that option this budget cycle. This budget cycle is the beginning of the period where you can start making some decisions on that. The way the contract reads, once we reach June 30th, essentially at any time, you can give a 120-day notice of your desire to terminate the contract. It was a 5-year contract with an option to renew beyond that. This is the end of the 3rd year. So that is one of the decisions that you'll have to, if you want to see a change, you'll have to have a discussion about that. In terms of the auditorium itself, Venue Works plans on, we have them scheduled for January 30th on your set of budgets, so. And we've also talked with them, had a discussion with them just to try to give them a context of where we are this cycle, just in regards specifically to some of the concerns at a community level about other issues that we'd like to try to address if at all possible, and just creating a different dynamic for how do we deal with things. Other funds that you can see a change in that the net, probably the other one that stands out to me is engineering. We budgeted less reimbursement in this account than what we've done in the past from projects, and we have a higher cost burden. When we had lost a couple of positions this last year, we replaced those 2 positions with people at a higher pay and more experience. I hope that works out fairly well for us. What I can say about the dynamics within our engineering department, it's been a major positive, just in terms of operationally. But that is a difference of how our operations are running down there. I guess another risk I'll throw out there for this cycle, it's been out there the last couple of years. What happens if backfill isn't there? And that's something that we need to be cognizant of as we move forward. The way that the funding formula was done when the property tax bill was approved 4 years ago, that was set to hold cities effectively harmless for a benefit that the state mandated on us to give. And the way it was set up is that was going to be an ongoing allocation to cities. For us, it amounts to about $420,000 annually. But it wouldn't be the first time, if they were to do away or limit backfill, it wouldn't be the first time that something that was promised from the state was eliminated.
I think it's a guarantee. That's the way I'm going into this cycle, is that money's not getting backfilled.
When the 411 system was set up originally, the retirement system for police and fire, that had a guaranteed funding from the state. They increased the benefits that were there, and because of the increases that they were putting in, they recognized that they were doing that. They said they would pay for that, essentially, is 2.5% of benefit costs. And when they hit a budget shortfall, they took that away and put that on us. When they gave the machinery and equipment, when they took that off of taxation back in the 90s, they promised to make up that shortfall. And when they hit a budget problem, they took that away. So it's a matter of time before that hits. But that's a risk that we just need to be cognizant of and note and just pay attention to. That's something that at any given time can be an issue we have to deal with and address. I've taken 45 minutes to get to CIP. That was what was on the agenda for tonight. The majority of the projects that are on the CIP, and the equipment specifically, the equipment will leave up to the departments to kind of go through what they're looking to do. And like Don, for the improvements down at the sewer plant, it makes more sense for him to address that than for me to say something stupid about what he's looking to do when I don't really know the improvements that as well as he does. you have two or several different ways of looking at our CIP. There's a project summary at the front. This is my spreadsheet that I use to track projects. If you look on there, some of the different buildings and facilities to start with, you'll note that we have the police building renovation in for this next year of $3.5 million. Well, that's more than what my Hershey's Kisses were.
I didn't get a kiss. You're not getting any of this.
I see there's a kiss in front of you, actually. Someone gave to you.
He stole it.
He stole it. A priority project that Eric has on here, the Mason Road Trail, the sidewalk. That's one that we do have funding to get that sidewalk along Mason Road. That will help to get kids off of the street, walking to school. That's in 2019, and I know people would like to see that occur sooner, but that is state funding that isn't available until then.
It's the federal fiscal year
Federal.
18. By the time you
He's starting
get
on that.
awards and grants,
Yeah.
it'll probably be the summer of 19.
Yeah, so federal 18 fiscal 18 begins
What is it?
October 2018.
Yeah.
So, and getting a project online to do something. Something that, Doug, I'm not sure if you're addressing, electronic ticketing, the handheld unit.
Yeah, I'll discuss that.
So that'll be something to assist Vicky with her operations that he'll be addressing. There's an area in here that's shaded on that sheet. I have that shaded just to give an idea of the projects that we pushed at, that I had to push out from the year that they were originally requested. And if you go to the third sheet on that, there's after the total by year, there's a set of projects that are not funded in the year desired. I wanted to put in there just so you could just see the year that each of those projects was originally desired to be done in, so that you can have a comparison there to make to then that highlighted area on the other page to see where they got pushed back to fit within our funding streams. And then I have one that I put not funded. And I just struggled with Eric's department's request. I think I understand what they're trying to do is establish an endowment fund. I just struggled to see where I could fit that into putting at the level of some of the other projects that they were requesting to have done. Something that is different in here, and I think I'll let Eric address for vehicles, nuisance with why you're looking at two vehicles there. That it has to do with the two that we'd had leased, the two Priuses, and how we move forward as those come off lease this next fiscal year.
We back up a second here.
Yeah.
This $350 for indoor recplex is the Weingard money, correct?
Correct.
All right.
I'll go back to that in a second because I shouldn't have skipped over that. And building inspections. We've used hand-me-down vehicles for inspections department, but I don't know if you've noticed the Ford Taurus that they have that sets aside. I don't know if you've noticed how little it ever leaves. As it too often when it does leave, it ends up being towed out to property maintenance or vehicle maintenance to be worked on. It's just, it needs a new vehicle, and for them to have a vehicle that they can use instead of their own on a job site, they need something that at times they're driving somewhere that isn't the easiest to get to too. As you mentioned up above, a couple of those we've received a couple of different assessment grants. Those are federal grants from the EPA. One was the $400,000 we had an announcement on over the summer or spring for doing assessments of properties in a downtown area. We received also an announcement this last weekend, about a week and a half ago, for an additional $200,000 grant to develop plans for the reuse or marketing of facilities that have gone through the assessment process. Is that a fair statement, Eric? Or do you want to help me on that?
Yeah, the assessment is to evaluate for environmental contaminants and the planning, area-wide plannings to evaluate reuse options and better use options for vacant properties and lots.
So we've budgeted those, the assessment grants to be a project that lasts over 3 years, and the planning over a 2-year cycle. Again, those are all federal funds, no local match. We've just made an estimate of how that might be spread out over the course of that time frame. The riverfront flood protection improvements, you see how we're staggering out those sales tax projects. Those are, again, all backed by sales tax that we have to bond locally, and then we'll pay, are set up to pay off the bond payments from the collections we have from the sales tax growth. And that is the state's portion of sales tax collections that pays for that, not local option sales tax.
I think that's important to say it again.
One that I don't know if Nick was planning on talking about, so I will hit on the parking lot resurfacing. The parking lot, Main Street and Valley on the south side of that intersection. The 2 buildings at the south end of that are scheduled to be demoed sometime in the next few months and transitioned over to us. We'll have to pave that, so we've set aside $50,000 to do the paving and join that into our existing parking lot there. And then, as you noted, the indoor rec facility. Absent knowing a whole lot out of what may or may not occur, this is a project that is not a city project, but I fully expect that we'll have that the request that ultimately does come to the city on the indoor recplex will ask for a funding amount that is at least the amount of the funds that were donated to us for this purpose, and it would make sense that we would put that money into the project. The second page, some equipment that I would notice or note. Nick has put in here 4 different flood protection projects. Now, as we start talking about having a flood wall, we have to have some way to haul those panels and store them. So the majority of that is, you see trailers, then some miscellaneous equipment to outfit or equip those trailers to handle holding the panels that will be part of the project. The project, I think, itself would envision paying for the panels as part of that project, but not a storage such as these trailers. And he's looking to use the Morton building that's down along the riverfront on a temporary basis for the storage of those trailers. I don't know that that's the best place. I don't know if we have another place to do it.
It's shared between there and the armory.
Yeah. So the goal long term is the next phase of the project happens in 2020 to 2021 to have the where those pump houses are being built, have a storage shed that is accommodated within or attached to the pump house to have as a storage site for that. Payment out of those, we have funds, well, we have funds that are in, that we've built up somewhat of a surplus as we've gone through past flood accounts or issues where we've been able to get reimbursement for expenses that have occurred in the general fund. We've put all of those reimbursements, though, into our miscellaneous flood account. So that is and we've used that to do a couple of other minor flood projects over the last few years. And it makes sense to use that to the extent possible for flood-related purposes. One of these, a telemetry piece of equipment, would come out of local option sales tax. Eric increased my cost with that pump house, and I think that that's something I'd hope that you highlight what's going on and what the problem is that you're having out there at the golf course during your presentation. And really, I guess that you get down into the streets. We've tried to break out the different projects that are going on. I don't know that I need to go through these as much as letting Nick go through them when he gets to them. But out of these projects, we have several, if you want to be able to make sure that you can highlight the ones that are being funded through the region. We have several of these projects, though, that are TIF funded. On this list, the agency street improvements east of Highway 61 has a TIF portion for doing our portion of that project. I'm sorry. Yeah, agency street improvements east of 61. That the only grant that we have on that is on the signals, traffic signals themselves. The remainder of that project we're scheduled to do TIF, and we're looking to borrow that funding in the next couple of months with this next bond issue. The agency street rise is associated with GE, widening that corridor over to West Burlington Avenue. Our portion of that would be a TIF, would be done with TIF. I would note, we do, out of the street department, we've set aside to do both LED light replacements on an ongoing basis and ADA that shows that ADA transition plan. We have a requirement to to be fairly systematic about getting curb cuts done around the community, and to make sure that those are all meet ADA standards. And part of that effort, we built that into all of our asphalt overlay projects where we do those street improvements. We do the intersections as well. This is setting aside a different amount just specifically to cover additional ADA compliant curbs.
So when Nick gives his presentation, he's going to talk about street rehabs and.
He gets to talk about that, and so hopefully he's got a 5-year plan on how to do it. One thing I would note out of that, you can see, like for our general resurfacing, reconstruction, rehab program on those 5 years, there's 1 year that's not funded.
Yeah,
We have nothing in.
It's going to be my question.
But if you look at the projects that are going around it, we've got improvements. Mount Pleasant Street has an HMA resurfacing project. Agency Street has 2 separate ones budgeted. And you still have the seal coat program going on. So even though we can only afford to fund so much at a given time, so doing these specialized projects keeps us from being able to be in a position to borrow for that general street resurfacing. And really what is taking its place in this budget cycle is rehabbing the U.S. Bank building, borrowing the money to do that, the $2.2 million. We can afford with our tax levy. I mean, our goal there is to get down to about a $3 tax levy, paying off debt in about 10 years. Well, that means we can afford to bring on about $2 million annually of debt. So if we take on $2.2 million this year, and then what we can afford to do as we go into out years, we just need to be cognizant of.
Yep.
So
Okay.
the majority of it will go into street projects in the other 4 years.
Okay.
And of course, we have our ongoing sanitary sewer projects, the sewer separation work. So Nick gets to talk about the sanitary sewer, and the wastewater treatment plant will be done. Behind my 3 sheets there, I'm not going to go through the next set, But what you can see as you look at that, it has the projects and funding sources done by department. It breaks them out. So here you can see, for instance, the different airport projects. We have one airport project that we have agreed to fund a portion of, and that's the major rehab that they're looking to do in fiscal year 20. Out of that, we have an agreement to pay about $513,000, which we'd be covering out of have to bond for or borrow for to cover. But you can see as you look at not only by the departments here, you can see how we'll end up coding them, or what our funding source will be on them. It breaks that out. Again, that example with the airport, what's going to be GO bonds, what's going to be a federal grant, and what's going to be an outside entity. The outside entity on that is West Burlington and a portion from Des Moines County. So it doesn't always necessarily identify who the outside entity is, but each of the projects has, well, if it has an outside entity, they just have some other source. Not only do we break it out by department so that you can look and know what equipment to be thinking about as each department makes their presentation, but behind the breakout by department is then, great, I've gone too far, a breakout by funding source. There's 10 pages of by department. And then you get to the projects by funding source, which is more like 5 pages. But here you can see what's being funded. As an example, the third one down, general obligation bonds. It lists out the different projects by year that we'll be looking to do general obligation bonds. And you'll see in there, not the highest dollar ones are all the ones that are associated with the flood wall. We have an outside funding source that is hopefully adequate to cover all of the debt on that, but this still counts against our debt limit, and we have to do the borrowing ourselves. And then you have the column right below that, general obligation bonds that are TIF-related projects. So as you look through, you can see how the source of funding for each of them. So we overwhelm you with paper. Any questions on this CIP? Again, the majority of it, hopefully you are able to address with each of the department heads covering their pieces of what they're trying to accomplish.
Could you?
The hardest part of getting this all to work, for them, those that don't have an outside funding source, and we're trying to get them accomplished, our two main sources of funding these, well, 3. One's borrowing, the GO bonds, but otherwise it's either local option sales tax or hotel motel tax that we use to fund this. And so what I wanted to make sure you had in here too was a breakdown of those two funds to see behind the CIP. You have the sales tax fund. The first sheet is what goes in the budget document, and after that is off of our spreadsheets, our Excel sheets, where we try to look at how can we take the projected sales tax collections that we'll have over the next 5 years, meet our obligations for different pieces, and then what can we afford to fund for projects. So on that sheet, if you want to take a look at that, not the first one that will end up in a budget document, but the second one, it has a beginning balance going along the top. We're looking to come into fiscal year 2018 with $600,000. If you look on the back of that page, at the very bottom, you'll see the ending balance. We're looking to end with $629,000. thousand. And the goal is to be at 15% carryover balance. We're not quite there, but we're close. But you can see then through the years, how are we doing? There are years where we're above and years where we're below. But over a 5-year period, we're looking to be above it at the end of 5 years. So what my goal is we put together these, funding of different projects, or pieces of equipment. How do we do it in a way that doesn't put us in a position where we're not maintaining that balance over time?
Can I ask you a question
Yeah.
about the Economic Development Sub-Fund?
Mhm.
Who represents us on that committee? The Economic Development Committee? Annie does?
We have not met in a long time.
So it shows a balance of 171,000, and we're putting in 70,000. And so are we using it currently, Stephanie, or is anything going with that? I don't know. Maybe that's something we could look at, whether it really needs 70,000 or not.
In previous years, this had, if you look at the note there, it says 5%,
Yes.
expected revenue allocation 5%. We're not doing anywhere near 5%. That, when I originally did the spreadsheet, was at a time where we were doing 5%.
And in a couple of years when I was on that committee, we weren't doing 70,000 either. It seemed we were less than that.
We were 50,000 the last couple of years.
Right.
Before that, it was up 220,000, I think, the highest year.
I think when I was on there, it was 50,000.
But that project, or that is something that it certainly is worth discussing. We don't have a lot of activity, but I think the main design on there is, if you have a major project come along, do you have adequate funds set aside to
Right.
be able to be of any consequence?
Yeah, I understand.
And I think that's probably the biggest thing that the chamber would talk about.
Yeah.
But what is that balance? I don't know. I mean, the last project we had that we did a match on was Shears, and that was like $15,000, I think. Is that? And that was a year and a half ago
Yeah,
or more.
We've used that fund for things that were maybe a stretch on whether they really should be
Probably
used for that.
did we fund the study for the electric out of that? The hydroelectric?
Yes, yes. we did.
Was one of the major projects. Did we pay for the downtown quiet zones out of that, or is that separate? Separate.
Are there maybe some projects that we could look at funding with that balance for something that maybe we don't have the money for?
You could certainly do that.
I'd like to look into that.
It's an idea.
Yep.
Parking lot.
That's certainly something that you can look at. But here I wanted to show you, as we talk about projects, what are the other things that we're committed to covering out of here too. The debt service on the B's note. I think that goes through 23. I think it goes through 23. And local option sales tax, by the way, ends in 22. Subject to another vote. Other than that, half of it we send to the general fund for property tax relief. You see in here additional property tax relief, and that's a figure that's growing by year.
Yes.
To maintain operations, essentially.
Right.
At some point that becomes, it's a problem. At some point it becomes a major problem. We fund 20% of our patrol division. It says 8 officers. I think that's just over 8, the way we're set up. But we fund 20% of our patrol division out of local option sales tax, along with all of the replacement vehicles and equipment associated with that. We send to the general fund a subsidy for engineering for our GIS system that's used both by Public Works and by development departments are probably the primary users of that, but, I mean, it's available for all of us. And then our IT expenditures within the city is funded here. That includes this, what we're working on right now as an example is replacement of the phone system, which is a majority of that, along with the replacement of any computers that need done in this, and all the equipment for the network itself. This next year's major project, Stephanie, are you gonna get to the accounting, or do you have enough funds to do it? So, depending on how, if this funding is adequate, it's an upgrade with our accounting system. And our accounting system is divided into two components. Same vendor. The older component of that is what's considered a legacy system. The support level on it is, and are they doing any updates to that now, or no updates?
Annette does them all, doesn't she?
The other problem with that is that the two components don't speak to each other. So they speak to each other on a limited basis. So they're like a couple that needs to go to counseling. So, and that becomes a major, I mean, that is a significant issue. They're able to work through it, but getting the two systems to talk together, and I don't know what the two systems are. Your HR side is different from.
We have a cash receiving system, and that's the old system.
So cash receiving is the old system, but it doesn't marry into the other. So that's if they can get to it, that's their major project for this next year.
Do it.
Well, the problem is that do they have enough funds? We're going into this, for example, this year, the funds that we have set aside in order to accommodate getting the phone system done, you're putting off any computer replacements.
Isn't that funny? The accounting department doesn't know if they have enough funds. Something's not quite right with that.
So anyway, you see that those are some of the operational transfers that we do before we get to the expense transfers for actual projects below. And these projects, the expense transfers that are listed there below, that the bottom half of that sheet are for CIP items. And on the back side, as you're looking, the other two components that we fund out of here, economic development and then community field. We have an agreement to put $50,000 aside annually through 22. And I think that agreement did run through 22 to match up with the end of the expiration of sales tax. Kind of makes sense?
Boy, lots of info.
And hotel motel fund. Hotel motel, we're budgeted to bring in $900,000 this next year. Out of that, the base piece that we have to make sure that we cover is our contractual arrangement with the Convention and Visitors Bureau, which is it's a formula: 30% of the first 700,000 collected, and 400,000 of anything over 40% of anything over 700,000 collected. So if revenues come up higher, we pay them more. We have to match that formula. Auditorium improvements. This has been 17,000 in previous years, in the current year, and we're wanting to increase that to 24,000. We have besides base equipment in there that needs to get taken care of, and general maintenance, and the last one that came up was the elevator that we didn't have enough here to cover. We know that the major thing coming up is HVAC unit there. It's getting close to that point where it will very likely have a major cost that goes with it. So we want to make sure that we've started to get some additional funds set aside to handle it specifically as a project, along with other needs that come up down there. Riverfront improvements, essentially that is a transfer that we make to the general fund to cover our costs associated with maintaining the riverfront. Park and Rec, we fund capital, we set aside for capital items within Park and Rec. Art and cultural assistance at 15,000. We have three major pieces that we fund with that. And since, do you have that in here? Yeah, Art Guild is 12,250, and it's been that for several years. They had a request to increase that to 18,000, which I didn't budget to approve. The symphony has been 3,000 a year, and we're looking to continue that. And the municipal band, we haven't always funded this. We have funded it in some years, and they had a request in here to do 3,000 a year, and I thought it made more sense to consider doing that, and I did put that in there, subject to, if you wanted to kick it out, you certainly can, but
It wasn't that just this 1 year, for 1 year request?
they would like to see that every year. They make a request each year for this. And their request
They're a blessing to the city. They
It
really
was,
are.
it was one of those things that we cut back there when we were looking for ways
First
to
thing started.
Yep.
cut money, and they found that they could raise the funds on their own, but I thought this was a special year, they had a special anniversary
The
year or
first
something.
one they did was a special year, and since then, it's been each of the last 2 years. I mean, the last 3 years, they have asked for the same amount each year. That's certainly one, if you were wanting to eliminate, can be done.
I don't have any problem with it.
Community field, we set aside the 45,000, we cover, their utilities. What else do we cover out of that? They have an association fee for about 6,000 a year. They agreed to cover that on their own for 3 years, 3 years ago. We're at the end of that, and we'll be expecting us to start paying that again. And it seemed like there was a third item that, besides utilities, that came in that. And I just can't remember if I'm saying that wrong or not. But that's the total of what we fund out of there for that. And then special projects is essentially the remainder. And if you turn and look on the back side of that sheet, you can see for Stephanie has included in here what the different projects are. Along the top, you can for the budgeted expenditures has that fee for the Convention Visitors Bureau. Rec activities, I didn't mention what we do there. That's essentially a transfer to the general fund to support operations. It covers our costs associated with running the parks and the pool, etc. The Recplex, you see there increased to the 75,000 from where it had been the last few years, more in the 35 to 40,000 range. The Baseball Association, what we pay for the debt service, the 3 different cultural pieces, our support to the general fund for maintaining the riverfront. We do set aside annually money for the Renewable Energy Committee, $5,000, and they have a little pool of projects that they've done out of that, and we maintain a balance for them. Covering a Hucks Harbor note, that goes back a few years to when the pool was done out there, and we have, I think, 2 years left of repayments on that. And then we've set aside, Eric's started this last year setting aside 5,000 into trail maintenance. As we get more and more trails and they start to mature, we've decided we need to make sure we have some funds set aside to do repairs as they come up. And the rest of these are then going to be projects. No, not quite all the rest, huh? You got the bridge run match, we put aside 6,000 annually for that. And then Eric, people have the choice when they go through the bridge run to don't designate that towards one of 3 projects typically?
Yeah.
And what are those?
Well, we're looking at contacting and seeing what the different interest level is. We haven't had a participation from the other groups, so we're looking at that this year. One is the pool. It's been the YMCA Domestic Violence Shelter, and there's one other I can't think of offhand. Hope 8. Young House Family Services. So that's something that we're looking at evaluating as well.
Okay. And then auditorium improvements, as we kind of mentioned before, how we have the sub-account for that is listed on the bottom. And we have a balance in there, 138,000. That is right about 15%. And as we tried to allocate where we could afford to do projects moving forward, the projects that are listed on the CIP that are funded with hotel motel tax, given these other commitments that we have, puts us at about, well, we're just under where we need to be, actually. The final year, we end up about 20,000 too low, which tells me one of Eric's projects that's funded in fiscal '22, right now, it wouldn't be able to get funded. But the other years, we all track right at that 140 to 160,000 carryover.
So this 900,000 is your conservative number?
Yeah, and as you think through, I don't know if that's conservative enough or if it's too conservative. Our collections last year were 990,000. We're on track this year through the first quarter to be at about 870.
We're hoping you're.
So I want that to be fairly realistic, and what I don't want to do is, I hope that I'm setting it at a level that we don't overcommit to projects.
Right.
And Eric does know, and we have told him, they need to make sure that as we go through this year and then again next year, depending on where these revenues track, he's got to figure out what's his order of priority for what gets eliminated.
Do you think that, I mean, are you comfortable with that number?
Well,
Because, I mean, I'd much rather just lower it right now, just because,
it's hard for me to make a determination on that. I mean, next year, you're making a forecast out what happens next year. By the end of next year, we'll have another motel online that's collecting revenues. It won't be for the full year, but it'll probably be for about half of that year. I don't know where to put that level of impact. I might be underestimating what the level of impact of that new hotel has on what collections can be. I certainly know that the impact of the fertilizer plant is lower now than it was a year ago, and will most likely be less next year, but we still have what's going on with the Recplex that drives a lot of the business and just normal day-to-day activities for everything else too. I don't know. I do still want to make sure that he does have an understanding that as he goes through this, if the revenue tracks below it, they do lose projects. So they still have a level of prioritization for having to pull things off. Yeah, we have the ability to adjust. Again, though, that's where, as we're I was trying to figure out how to make the depot work, doing the north end of that. If we commit to a project like that, there's no undoing a commitment like that.
right on.
Our internal stuff, we can move around as we need to.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Any other questions? Otherwise, I've talked for an hour and a half.
You're long-winded, Jim.
We know that. I see you had pizza over there. Were you wanting to do something with that before you had
Yeah, let's
Rhonda talk?
take a quick break and then get back after it, so.
So we're gonna do the library budget.
Kids, you guys help yourselves. I got some for everybody.
That's the nature of this. Who bought that?
I think Shane,
I think it was him.
Yeah.
probably Shane.
Pretty cool.
Most likely.
I think we'll be out here by 5:30.
What, you wanna be out of here by 5:30?
Didn't say that, I'm just asking. You're picking on me. I'm not supposed to go to a birthday party, and if I can't make it, I can't make it. Let my wife know that.
I think the pressure's on Ron. Pressure's on Ron.
Yeah. Boy, that's a lot of numbers, too.
Which piece of that?
All of it.
Made any progress yet on that?
Check with Charlie, they sent everything into the EPA, the cooperative agreement. I'll check with Charlie tomorrow, see if they heard back on it. They got clearance on phase ones, but phase two required this cooperative agreement to be approved. They sent everything in last week, I signed everything, so I'll check with Charlie tomorrow on that. They were thinking a week or so through the EPA. I'll check on that.
So I got two tenants that want to be in May 1st.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say yesterday.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
that's what they would like to.
yeah.
Don't be offended, Mayor, but I'm gonna wait till after we're done.
Maybe really. Oh, wow.
Every bit of it.
Yeah.
Got some light fixtures.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of work. Yeah, they had some stuff in there. How many units or tenants are you looking at?
Hey, you don't do it in slow motion. I'm just trying to help you out. I'm trying to do you a favor, whatever. You don't appreciate nothing.
First two, basically, the first one's gonna use one day, the full depth.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay.
I've got another one that's maybe just like 600 or 700 square feet. If it works out right, I want to use the back part of what's there.
Yeah.
I like to use that for the shop. So
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
actually talking to those together about restaurant.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
Most of them,
Lord of mercy.
there would be a 10-foot area behind that main
Yeah.
service area. Put in bathrooms there. First, maybe second, maybe the kitchen.
Oh, okay. The open glass, yeah. Oh, neat.
And then the kitchen.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, nice. That's exciting. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's kind of been the key downtown is there's a lot of interest. It's just is the owner of the building willing to fix it up to have it come in?
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, that always seems to be the interest. It's just whether the owner is willing to allow them to fix it up or fix it up themselves and get the 10 grand. So,
No, I'm willing to go either way.
yeah,
We'll do it or they'll do it, the rent's gonna be based on.
yeah, yeah, very good. Veterans has been here beginning over at it's like,
I realized when I said that, I would already be there.
Okay.
Thanks.
Kids about written, well, they're written, everybody gets some.
I'm not.
All right, you crazy kids. We're gonna ask you to collect yourselves and find yourselves.
Your snack was better.
I could have told you that, brother. Mrs. Freebird.
All right. Well, good afternoon. I am going to take just one brief moment before I start on my presentation to introduce our board members who are here tonight. I know you guys appoint them, but you don't always get to meet them. So I want to make sure you know who they are. I know I don't really need to introduce Jerry Parks. Everyone knows Jerry for different things that he's involved in. But Jerry is our board president and also the longest serving member of our current board. And then we have Becky Godfrey, who's here. And Becky was here in November for the annual report that I gave. So thank you for coming back for another meeting. And then Sarah Goff also is here tonight. So thank you to you guys for coming for the meeting and for volunteering to help govern the library. It's a big job, and I'm glad that they're willing to do that. So my goal tonight with my presentation is to give you an overview of our budget. I know you have in your packet I think there's 3 sheets there of details about the library budget for fiscal year 18. And I also handed out to you copies of my presentation slides, so you have those for referral too. So I'll do the overview. I'll also try to give you some context, both sort of historical context of the budget, but also a context in terms of how do we use this money? What happens with all of it? My other goal was going to be to get us out of here in the 2-hour time that Jim talked about on Monday. I don't know. We'll see. See how that goes. But I'm going to just jump right in and talk about expenditure totals. So this just gives you that context historically of where the budget's been at for expenditure totals. You can see I added a few lines in there. The up and down line there is a few months into fiscal year 7, so November 2006, we moved into our new building. You can see that the horizontal line there shows that fiscal year 18 expenditure level is the same as it was in fiscal year 7. So 11 years ago, same expenditures that we had then, and in that year that we were between buildings. Now, I don't need to go into the part of the story. You've heard me. I'm almost 10 years now. I've been coming. So you know, in the last 10 years, that while expenditures are flat to 07 there, that they are equal to that our use level has gone up dramatically since moving to the new building, and the type of use that we see has gone up and changed. So I won't go into all those details because I know you know that already. Another way to look at the expenditures is to look at the percent of change over the years. I did the last few years here, so you can see the couple of years where we took a very deep cuts in our budget. And then you can see that in fiscal year 13, just last fiscal year, that we had a 2% range increase in our budget. Same thing this year, fiscal year 17, and we're looking at the same thing in fiscal year 18. So if there's a theme for our budget this year, it's steady, stable. We're not asking to do anything but maintain where we are after the cuts that we did. So that's really not trying to add anything new, not looking to restore hours or restore staff, but we'll talk more about that as I go through. But I thought this one showed pretty well that we're just looking at staying steady there. Another way to look at the expenditures, here again it shows that little bit of dip and then shows the steadiness in the last few years. And I also put up there just so you could see, Jim mentioned, you know, we're not a big revenue producer at the library, and libraries just aren't set up. That's not what libraries do. But we do have some revenue, and so you can see what the expenditures are after you take away the revenue that we're predicted to have. And so just a little bit about our revenue. You can see that our revenue's gone up. If you look back there, fiscal year 02 I used, but you can see it's kind of steadily climbing and then plateaued off. And that happened right about the time that we signed 10-year 2080 agreements with the contracting entities. So Des Moines County, West Burlington contracts with us, Middletown contracts with us now as well. And so that's when we put those into place. And one of the things about those agreements is that they were designed to be studied, to have a predictable cost to the other organizations and a predictable income for us. And also to be predictable for the residents there. So they knew for 10 years they're going to be able to use the library and have that stability. I think it was mentioned already that there is a levy for the library. That's part of that revenue. Another piece is the fees and fines that people pay at the library. You know, in the perfect world, I'd love that to be zero. Everybody returns their things on time, nothing ever gets damaged. So that'd be great, but we did see in the last year that those went down just a little bit. I don't necessarily know that that's going to stay down. We didn't really do anything to dramatically cut the fees that we charge, but we just didn't bring in quite as much. But overall revenue staying very stable. So for personnel, I'm just going to keep using that word, I think, stable and steady. We're not looking for any changes in personnel between fiscal year 17, fiscal year 18. The only little tweak is in our clerks and our shelvers. I took a look at fiscal year 16 actual hours that people worked and saw that we needed to adjust that a little bit. But if you look at the bottom line, we're still looking at 16.9 FTE being budgeted for the next year. So really actually a tiny smidge down from what's budgeted for this year. I did put up in the corner there, though, just as a reminder, that we have lost quite a few staff positions, 5 since fiscal year '02, most of those happening in the last 4 years or so. If you, we've always had one director, so that hasn't changed, but the administrative assistant used to be a full-time position. We used to have 4 full-time supervising librarians and 8 full-time library assistants. We also had in there, it doesn't show anymore, we used to have a full-time maintenance person. So a lot of our cuts that we made were in full-time staff. So now, if you look at, put all the staff together, there's more part-time people than full-time people working at the library. But this is also, fiscal year '16 was right around the same amount as well. So we haven't really had much change in personnel, like I say, or asking for anything like that. So what do you get? Well, how do we use the team, the time, the talent of our team members, what kind of responsibilities they have? So this just shows you how we divide out duties at the library. We have 3 sections. Again, that used to be 4. We combined technology and collections into one section. I think we're on about 2nd year of that now, so I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So administration, you know, I'm the one and Sarah is the half. And we together make up the administration piece. Though I always think it's a little misleading because the truth is that, yes, we're responsible for the administrative parts like budgets and reports and statistics and all that fun stuff. But really, I see my job is facilitating making it happen at the library. So it's making sure that everybody has the resources they need. It's also doing whatever needs to be done that day in that moment. So if you had come first thing this morning, you'd seen me out there with the salt on the sidewalks. You know, so whatever needs to be done in the day, that's what I'm going to do. If you come in, you're very likely to see me answering questions at the help desk or checking out books or checking in books. We all really flex around quite a bit to cover what needs to get done. Another big piece of what I see as my role and Sarah's role is that we are always looking at how can we improve things, whether that's improving a process or it's just looking at new ways of doing things, reallocating how we're using people on our team so that they are in the right place, those kind of things. So it's facilitating and always looking for improvement, and also doing purchasing and all those other things. So the Youth Services Department, when we did cuts to staff, we avoided making cuts in this area of our staffing. And part of the reason we did that is because we had done a strategic plan in fiscal year 12. We talked to community members, and their #1 thing that they wanted from the library was to serve children. To create readers was the way they were phrased, and I'll talk a little bit more of that later. But because we had just done that strategic plan before we were looking at making cuts, we had that as a guidepost for us to look at, okay, this is really important to the community, so we're going to try to maintain as much as we can of what we do in that area. So, so not much change there in terms of staffing. So our Youth Services Department, we actually call it Youth and Family because so many of the programs that we do, family members come as well. I just was at a meeting earlier this week and a mom was saying how much she's looking forward to coming with her daughter again in February for story time. They've been missing it this month because we're in a little bit of a break. So families look forward to being able to come. What we do is really we're trying to build learners and prepare kids for school, develop school readiness through all the classes that we offer, and then support learners. And by that we don't just mean like homework support, we mean encouraging them to realize that learning is a lifelong endeavor. It's not always going to just happen in the classroom, so the library is a place you can come and learn the rest of your life. Another important part, I think, of what we do for the youth area is that we serve all ages from babies to teens. And in the last few years, we filled in some gaps there. When I first started working here, almost 15 years ago, we didn't have a program for infants and families. And we didn't really have anything once kids got into school until they were teenagers, and that we only had sporadically. So the youth services area has really done a lot to add to that. So we now have programs for babies, we have programs for kids in elementary school, kids in middle school, a lot of different services available. And I think it really serves a great purpose and has an impact on our community in the way that it's a location that people can come to. There's no charge. They can come and spend time with their kids. I worked last Saturday, and I think it was about 3:30. I looked up from the customer service desk, and what I saw was there's a man who comes every Saturday. I see him every time I work with his sons, and they spend some time playing with the trains, doing something on the computers, checking out a bunch of books to take home with them. At that time, he was there. There was a mom there. There were like 3 other men there with children. It was just great to see all these community members coming and knowing that's a place they can come and spend time, and there's no fee involved. And they can take stuff home with them, too. So I think that's a great thing. And then also, I think that, it's been several years now since we've had a teen center downtown. We really have taken that on as a responsibility at the library, to be that place, that safe, welcoming place that teens can come and spend time, or come to some of our programs that we offer. That's why every Thursday night, we have different programs available for teens. So tonight, they're doing a program as we speak. The other section, this is the one that we combined. I guess I should say there in the youth area, one of the things that we changed, we didn't eliminate staff, but we did change that we have a youth desk, but we don't staff it year-round. We only staff it for the 2 months that we're doing the summer reading program. And the reason we can do that is because of the layout of our building. The building really does help us to make some changes based on the efficiency of it compared to where we were before. So in the old facility, the children were in the basement or lower level, adults were upstairs, and so we had to staff 2 desks all the time. But when we were looking at making those changes, we thought, well, that's one area that we can observe from the main desk, so we don't have to have someone there all the time. The trade-off is we don't have someone there who greets the kids and their families, proactively approaches them and says, what can we help you find, and tells them about things that are going on. Instead, we're there to answer questions when they need it, but we're not right there looking up to help them at all times. So in this section, as I mentioned, this is a combined section. We used to have 2 people in 2 different sections overseeing this, combined it into one, and the technology aspect is really a huge aspect for us. We do our IT on our own. It's been that way since I came to work here. I'm not sure why it was set up that way, but we do our own IT. And so we have about 40 computers that are for the public area, and then probably about 30 or more that are at the service desk and the staff desk. So there's quite a lot of computers to maintain. We started laptop checkouts, so we have those that we need to maintain and the ones that we use for classes. We also do some classes to help people not just have access to the computer, but then know how to use it. And I was just talking to someone about how we have gone away from necessarily having just big classes all the time to doing some one-on-one time with people if they want to make an appointment for tech things, because sometimes people have very specific questions, and that's really all they want. So 15 minutes with them answers it rather than preparing a 2-hour class. So those are the kind of things that our tech folks are working on. The collection area, when it merged into there, they do all the things from deciding what book to buy to getting it all the way to the shelf. And I'll say that one of the things that I think, we're in our 2nd year with this combined section. One of the things that we find when we lost staff is that we were redeploying the staff out to the direct service. So we need to make sure there's people out there to serve people at the main desk. So we put people out there, and we've taken away from their behind-the-scenes work time. And I think the collections area is one where we've seen that the most, where there isn't as much staff time left to devote to that. So we're still working on finding a balance there and looking at, as I mentioned, one of the things I love to do, process improvement, looking at ways that we can improve the process, other things that we can do to make that flow better now that that's a combined section and something we just don't have as much time for. So. Our other section focuses on community and customer service. So this is the section of where the focus is on the customer service desk and the help desk. So it's the circulation of materials, checking things in, checking them out, registering people for their cards, answering questions. Sometimes that's tech questions. Sometimes it's local history questions. We get a lot of people who are interested in that, and it's unique to our area, so we're happy to do that. A lot of times it's job related. We have a lot of people who come in and need help setting up an email, uploading things to an online job application, or help with looking at their resume and helping them format, different things like that. So we do quite a bit of that. We also, under this area, do a lot of promotion. So this area is responsible for our newsletter, for our social media, getting the word out about what we have to offer to the community. And I think a couple of the things that they do are ones that aren't as well known. Our homebound delivery service, so when people aren't able to get out anymore, we will customize a package of materials for them, and we have a volunteer group that will deliver them. We also will go to other libraries to find materials and bring those in through our interlibrary loan program. And that's a very well-loved program, but maybe not one that everybody takes advantage of as much as they could. We did just recently, one man who loved it so much gave us a $100 donation to help pay for the postage for interlibrary loan, because there is expense involved in making that happen, even though the other libraries don't charge us for the materials. So that is the way that we use our staff. The other section of our expenditures budget that I wanted to pull out and look at is our operating expenditures. So that's everything else but personnel. And that encompasses things like building expense. So we pay for the people that clean our building. So we don't have a maintenance person anymore, so we contract that out. We also use property maintenance. We had a couple of the guys at the library today, and we've really enjoyed working with them. It's been great. We pay for the specialized software here that we use. So for doing interlibrary loan, for cataloging materials, the checking in, checking out, inventory, all those things, there's specialized software for that. Supplies, staff training, and then also all the materials we buy for the collection is all in this figure. So again, I put a line in there so you could get a sense the context where we're at. You can see the big drop-off. So as we were making cuts in personnel, we were also making cuts in our operating expenditures. And as you see from that line, back in 2004, we had more funds in the operating expenditures than we do today. One of the reasons why we can do some of that, again, goes back to being in the new building. There is some greater efficiency available to us, so that's been very nice to be able to have. But we've also looked at every little thing, down to we changed our vendor for janitorial supplies and some of the products that we use. So we've made lots and lots of changes there. So in terms of our collections budget, which is our kind of one of the main things that we do, buying materials and checking them in, checking them out. You can see that this, for fiscal year 18, it would be about $72,000. And fiscal year 13, before we had cuts, we were at over $200,000 for collection materials. So we really pared back in this area significantly. I did a little chart here too, so you can see how we kind of divided that up. We cut back the adult materials the heaviest, and really tried to keep more in the youth area. Again, that was the #1 thing people wanted, was serving youth. And then we also have our online tools. We provide, you can download books and music, and you can magazines, so lots of different tools there, online tutoring, all those things I've talked about when I was here for the annual report. And then also subscriptions. We do offer magazines for all ages. So gives you an idea of how that money gets used. So one of the things when I was here for the annual report that we talked about is how much we now do in terms of classes. So we have a lot of classes and events. We've always done classes and events. We've always had story times, things like that. but it's become more of a draw for people as we've become more of a community destination, more of a community center. So same numbers that you saw last time, but I did go ahead and put in for you here an average attendance, so you can see how that looks. Now, I've been keep talking about how we're really looking at in this budget to maintain and to stay steady and stable with what we're doing. When I talk to staff members about the classes, one of the things we talk about is we are not looking to offer more classes. More isn't as important to me as having them be more impactful. So we want to look at every class that we offer and say, okay, we know Wiggle Time is very popular. We offer it 5 times in the week. And so we know we want to continue that. But we want to look at the other things that we offer and see, are we getting enough people coming? Is there the interest? If not, let's not do that one. And put focus into getting more people to the classes we already offer. So one of the things that we've been working on is getting more consistent in our promotion of every activity that we have. We have our monthly newsletter. Usually I would have brought you a copy because I'm always handing those out. But also just making sure we get things into the Friday Facts and just wherever we can so people in the community know what's here. And I'd be more excited to see our participation numbers go up than the actual number of classes to go up. So we're not looking to increase the classes, but to improve and make sure that they are fitting the needs and fitting the outcomes that we want to see. And one of the things, though, you can see we have a very different in terms of per event attendance from youth to adult. And part of that is because a lot of our adult activities are classes like tech classes, and you don't want 50 people in a tech class. It's too much. You really need to keep some of those smaller. Even with youth classes, if Wiggle Time, we try to do about 20, 25 kids and their families. If we went to 40 or 50, it'd be chaos. You can't do that. So you need to keep the classes smaller, and that's why we offer multiple sessions of those instead. Now, when we have a magician come, sometimes we have 300 people there. That works great. But for some, we just don't want to get them too big either. Now, the other thing with classes and events is we do not have any funding in the budget for the supplies, the speaker fees, any of those kind of things to hold those events. So what we do instead is we turn to our friends, the library group. And for a long time, that has been a big part of what they do. Now, I'll put in a little plug because tomorrow night they have their trivia night fundraiser, and on the 28th of this month, they have their next book sale. Besides doing those, they also do, they have the footnote shop that's open every day that we're open. So they put in a massive amount of volunteer hours and raise money that they then turn around and make available to us for things like our seniors program that we do once a month, and we bring in outside speakers. Supplies, food for the teen events, because that always helps if you have food for the teens. But I put up a picture here too of our TICOS group with our new pop machine, just to show that not only is our friends the library working to raise funds to pay for the class supplies and things like that, so we don't need to ask for that in our budget with you, but our teen group, which stands for Teens Inspiring Change, Optimism, and Service, they're really getting out there and trying to do some service things. They work with the Optimist Club, and they go out and put up flags, at Flag Day and Memorial Day, Veterans Day. They do all of those. So for every flag they put up and every flag they take down, the Optimists give them $1. And that all goes into their programs. So it helps to pay for snacks at their programs or pay for a speaker to come in for them. They came up with the idea themselves of wanting to have a pop machine at the library. For them, our coffee shop closes at 2. They can't get there till after 3 usually, or on Saturday, and the shop's not open. So they wanted to be able to have something to drink. It is bottles with a lid. Our policy is you have to have a lid, so no cans. But they wanted to get the pop machine in, and they did. We worked with them on that. And now a portion of the cost, if you get a Pepsi at the library, goes back towards the teen services. So we have some wonderful volunteers who are putting in, like I say, a lot of time and effort to make those classes possible. Now, Jim spent some time talking about the capital improvement plan, and I say this every year, you won't see us, we're not in the capital improvement plan when you go through that list by department. This it doesn't mean that we don't have any capital kind of needs. For one, we don't have any vehicles, so we're grateful to our co-workers and other departments who let us borrow their vehicle if we need to go out of town for a training or a meeting or something like that. But this is the area where we would turn to the Library Foundation. The Library Foundation so the Friends Group, just to explain between the two, because I think sometimes it's a little confusing. The Friends Group, they do the fundraisers, they do the book sales, they do the footnotes. The money they bring in for that, they then turn around and give back to the library throughout the year. They are not doing long-term investment. The foundation developed out of the Friends, and the foundation started because they wanted to be able to do long-term investing, looking at stability and sustainability. And so they invest their funds into long-term vehicles, and then the interest that they receive, or the income they get from that, is what they then have to work with in terms of giving funds back to the library. So it's sort of like the endowment, talking about creating endowments. They don't like to dip into their principal at all because that's meant for the long term and to invest for the future. But when their annual earnings, then we can talk to them about making donations to the library. So just to give you a sense, last year they gave just shy of $100,000. So that's $100,000 that we did not have to come and ask you for as part of our budget. Some of those things they've given for have been, we had some damage to a roof, so we had to get that fixed, and they took care of that. A lot of times they give for our building issues and technology. So we have a wall that needs repair at the library, a little damaged by the parking lot, and it's not nearly as expensive as the walls Nick was talking about on Monday. It's just much cheaper than that, but more than we could afford to absorb into our budget that we have for building repair. You'll see if you look at our items, it's not that big. That's more for very small things. So we went to the foundation for that, and that repair is going to get done starting next month. We also last year updated the software on our HVAC system. After 10 years, more and more things need to be updated, and that came from the foundation. We're currently updating the public computers. All the public computers are a thin client system that we've had for 10 years. So, technology, 10 years is a really long time. So we are getting a new system for that, and again, we turn to the foundation for that. They just, actually, I met with them on Tuesday, they meet quarterly, and they gave the funds for that. So they anticipate another year of giving us about $100,000. In the future, we're at 10 years, so I know the carpet, maybe we'll get another 5 years out of it, but at some point we're going to need to replace carpet. Foundation is where we would go for that. So that's why you don't see us in the capital improvement plan. The foundation is there to support some of those needs. So these are some numbers you saw when I did the annual report. I just wanted to end with talking a little about what the impact we have in the community. So, and the way that we use our staff, again, their time and their talents to offer the classes, to answer the questions, to help people with the technology, and to serve all those visitors that come in, as well as check in and check out materials. I did a little calculation that 493,000 collection use includes some downloadables, includes database collections and things like that. Physical collection-wise, it's probably about 400,000. And so if you take that by the number of staff that we have, full-time FTE, you get an average of 24,000 items per person on the staff that we check in, that we check out, and we put back on the shelf. So there's a pretty high volume of what we're doing throughout the year, and a really heavy use by our community. Meeting rooms, as I mentioned before, another really big area, keeps growing. Just put up a typical month schedule. Say I should have brought the January newsletter. I usually would do that, but at least I had this in here. On a typical month, and usually December would be not so typical because of holidays, but there's something going on every day for people in the community to come and do at the library. If they want to come to a special event, of course, they can also come and just hang out. They can use the meeting room. They can check some things out. So there's always something to do. Now, I mentioned before our strategic plan. This was in 2012, so it's been 5 years. We are having someone come in and start to meet with the board next month about starting our next strategic plan. But when we did our strategic plan, part of the activity for the community group was to determine what are the main things that they want from the library. So the 6 things you see here: create young readers, satisfy curiosity, which just means lifelong learning, connect to the online world through technology access, visiting a comfortable place, knowing how to evaluate information, and discovering heritage. We do have a really nice genealogy local history collection a lot of people appreciate. So I think that's a lot. So I've always narrowed that down to just 4 things: youth, lifelong learning, technology, and community. I anticipate that the new strategic plan will have very similar outcome, just because the way I see people using the library and the things I hear from the community that they like and that they use the library. The other thing that's coming up for us in fiscal year 18 will be reaccreditation with the state. The state has a nice big book of standards that we get to try to meet and fill out the whole application, so we'll be doing that. So it'll be, again, going back to that theme for our budget, we're really looking at stay the course, but also at the same time looking at what we're doing and evaluating what we're doing and making sure that it fits our community's needs. As you know, our mission is to create opportunities for people of all ages. And we really do serve people from all walks of life in our community, and I think it's one of the great things I love about working at the library. And it all comes back to is all the departments work together to make this a great place to live, work, and play. So, I went over. I was tempted to peek earlier and I didn't, but not too bad, right?
You can blame it on Jim.
Okay.
That's right, because it's Jim's fault.
So I'm happy to answer any questions then that you might have. I know you have the details there of some of the things. If there's anything you want to ask about from that or from the presentation, I'm happy to do that.
I just want to say our library is second to I don't know. You know, it's very well ran. Your staff is phenomenal. Just want to throw that out there. We're really blessed. We've got a really good library, good programs. Every time I go down there, the kids welcome me. They treat me like I'm one of them.
They love having you come. Thank you for coming last month, by the way, and reading.
Last month. Thanks for inviting me. But
Yeah.
good library. It's an excellent library. I just want to throw that out there so people understand. Some people still don't go down and appreciate the library because that's just not the era that they're in their life.
Right.
That being said, the people that do utilize that, it's phenomenal. It's a phenomenal library. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you. And I'm glad you mentioned that because I had meant to say something more in my presentation about how much we owe to the staff. Because a lot of these cuts and things that we made over the years, they've been great, and they've been creative and supportive and really hardworking and very flexible. We keep moving people around and cross-training them in different things to try to make the best use of the time that we have and the talents that we have. And so we really owe them. We owe them a lot. We do get people who come from out of town, and sometimes, bigger communities, smaller communities. I just had somebody come from Florida and said, "Oh, your library is so much better than ours." And so people notice. But I do always, I know you mentioned some people who don't come down, and I always wish I could just go around door to door and say, "Let me come on down, I'll give you a tour." Because I do feel like those who don't come, there's probably something for them at the library, they just don't know it yet. So invite your friends, bring them with you.
And this is not to you just directly, but you got my phone message, I hope. This is really directed to the whole staff. This is not really going to be sustainable if we're going to try to maintain the same tax levy from year to year to year. It's just not going to work unless we get some cuts and some sacrifices from somewhere. And I'm glad to hear you talk about the staff being a whole team. But so it's not anything personal, but you have some plan, I hope, in case you don't get your 2.37% increase. Or,
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I want to say from experience, it's something I think about a lot. Is what will we do? For for one thing, I should say that for the library, our process is, the library board is actually ultimately responsible
Right.
for how our expenditures are. So, in terms of what I would do in that event is to work with the board. So they really would be the ones telling me how they want to make that happen. I always will, give ideas or help work with them on that, but I would turn to my board and work with them on a process if we had something like that. Because I just gave my presentation that we've had a lot of deep cuts in the past, and have cut things in all areas. So finding more to trim would be very challenging. And I think we looked, when we made the cuts a couple of years ago, we looked for things that would be least impactful on our customers and on the community.
Right.
There's really nothing there anymore that's not going to have an impact. We've really trimmed that back to where we're anything we would do would have an impact. And even if we were to say have a flat budget, not have any cut in what we currently have, but have a flat budget, that's still, it's only 2.3 increase, but it's $32,000, and even that would be hard to take a look for in our budget. But I would certainly work with our board and see what we could do. I mean, I would certainly hope that's not the case, but I totally understand where you're coming from.
Rhonda, I've got to say this just because I have to say this, but this is the complaint that I'm getting coming from. I still have people complaining because the position was just hired for. I believe it was, I want to say it was for a shelver. This is I got a text saying, don't forget to bring this up. I want to say it was like a shelver for $18 an hour or something like that. I know those numbers cannot be right, but that's a big concern and a complaint with people in the community when they're seeing somebody that is shelving. I'm not saying that that's not important, but there's people that are the complaint is there are people that are doing way rougher jobs that are making less money, and that it seems like for some of the more menial positions, it seems like the pay is a little bit on the upper echelon of the scale. That's the complaint that I'm getting. So I want to give that to you, because I always tell them, hey, I don't set the pay. I don't do that. I have no part in that. But that's a concern.
Well, it's not a shelver position. Our shelvers make in the $7 range. So just to clarify that, it's $7.50, something in that range is our starting for our shelvers. So that's not a shelver position. We do have an aide position that makes closer to that range. And I would say that I don't really set that either. Those are union positions, and that's what they're set at. So I understand what you're saying, but I do want to clarify that's not a shelver position.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You guys have any other questions? Okay.
Thank you, Rhonda.
All right. Thank you.
Could I just mention with our strategic plan? Could I just mention with our strategic plan?
I'm sorry, we don't know who you are.
Jerry Parks, 2729 South Main. The strategic plan process coming up, the model we're using involves getting a diverse group from the community to sit down and work with the facilitator and come up with, make some choices and develop a plan. We think it's going to be like one Saturday morning, a kind of a, get together. And we'd love if any of you all are interested in helping set the direction for the library for the next 5 years, we'd just be delighted to have you join us. No date has been determined yet, but we'd be happy to get one for you.
Good. Thank you.
Council, are we good with the library?
Yep.
Jim? Thank you, Rhonda.
Just a couple of things. Our next budget meeting is next Thursday at 3:30. Police and wastewater treatment plant / solid waste are on deck, depending on how timing works and how long Chief does. If he takes as long as I do, it may make it kind of tough, but it's a challenge to take that long, probably.
Sounds like the gauntlet has been thrown.
OpenGov on our website, right now, it's where it has been for finding it. Our budget data has been uploaded onto it. to find that, to go to our main website, you have to go under departments.
If they wait till tomorrow.
Well, where it is right now, you have to, if you go, you have to go to departments and go to finance, and it's on that page.
Left-hand side.
So she's showing how you would toggle to it to get it on our website. And can you see some of the questions that are on there? And
You can, click on that, please. Eric. Okay, so.
do you want to come up and just talk so that you talk through it rather than me?
Actually, that works out really well. I was looking at it today, so
Okay,
it does
good.
work well.
Yeah, so at the end there, you can see the 17-18 preliminary budget is out there. So that's all the information you guys have and we'll get. And then there's questions over here if you want to click on one of those, Eric. I mean, it'll bring up graphs and give you information.
Cool.
So then, too, you can click over on the revenues button, I believe. If you click on that, it should list the different kinds. So you can actually drill down. So then if you want to look at, like, say, backfill, go to intergovernmental revenues because that comes from the state. And then if you go to state grants, you can see the different items that you can look at. So you can click on, like, replacement tax, and it'll show you for the general fund what we're getting, or what we've estimated that we'll get. So just because you click on a question, you can go further than that if you want to,
Okay.
okay?
Very
And
nice.
then what are you trying to do for tomorrow?
And tomorrow, I'm going, can you go to the front page of the website? To make it easier for other people to find it, because it's kind of buried, you kind of got to look for it. So if you click on the Burlington, Iowa logo, yeah, okay. If you scroll down a little bit, right there where it says fiscal year FY18 budget meetings, I'm going to put a link there. That should link you right out to OpenGov then, okay?
Good deal.
Thank you.
Good deal.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And the only other thing I was kind of wondering, Steph, we handed out a lot of information in regards to our CIP plan, broken out by department and by funding source. Is that viewable from the website or no? And are we gonna get that out there? So, do you think that would end up under finance department as well?
Go back to OpenGov real quick. Yeah, I gotta look and see what's on there. I just want to know, we'll get it out there and I can let everybody know like that, but you go on the left side, all the way down. Further out of there. There's a couple of items. Here's where we had the CIP plan last year, and the preliminary budget is where we had it out there. I don't know why we're not able to see it now. But this is where I was thinking we could put it.
So, the CIP plan may end up getting attached within the OpenGov platform. Otherwise, it'll be under the finance tab so that people can view that. But as we figure out where that's gonna go, we'll let you know. You do have a copy of it, but for people to be able to get to it, we wanna make sure that they do have that ability as we move through the course of these discussions. So, any other questions or thoughts or comments?
I do have a couple. Matt Murray was here earlier, and he was on his lunch hour from his business and from where he works now. And he called me and expressed to me some concerns about putting the depot white boxing, moving it out to fiscal year '21. It's obvious if it doesn't happen in fiscal 2018, he's not going to be there to do his development. And I'm a little concerned with that too. I think we've got a momentum going at the library now with the investments that the city's made and with the investments at the depot, with the investment, what did I say?
Library.
Library.
Library's jamming too, but go ahead, Tim, go ahead.
Too many thoughts going through my mind. The depot, the momentum that we have going right now, I hate to lose that. We have a number of individuals that are wanting to invest in a restaurant. I mean, Matt Murray's the principal guy, the driver of that, but he's got investors that are wanting to make some investment. There seems to be some question as to what the city's willing to do and what Matt and his investors believe is necessary to be done to have the white box to the point that they need it to be able to continue the moving forward with their development. So Matt's not here to talk on his side. I can't speak for him. I don't know. Nick can come up and speak from the city side, but I think they need to sit down first and come back with.
Nick, why don't we'll go ahead and finish, but let him come and talk what they have done with it, but go ahead and finish.
Come on up. My only thought was that they, sitting down very, very soon and determining where that line of demarcation is to what needs to be done in the white boxing and coming up with a true figure. How do you respond to that?
What we did for the white boxing is I met with Jesse Casson and then our own building inspectors on what would be necessary to get the building to a base level to have anything function out of that building, which meant new gas service, new water service, new electrical service, and unfortunately new plumbing. There is existing plumbing that probably ran underneath the building, but that has been disconnected for years. So in my proposal, I had to try and get plumbing to the lateral. We did a lateral not too long ago through the middle of the parking lot. The easiest way that I saw was to create a lateral out in the grass area and run it back across our parking lot. Other than that, I met with Mark Schickendance and went over what Jesse Casson and then the building inspectors talked about for bringing electrical 200 amp. That's fairly minimal, given if you're bringing any sort of.
For a restaurant,
it's pretty minimal, but it's pretty basic. So
right.
If anything, that dollar figure should go up. Bringing in only replacement windows where necessary, replacement doors.
Only where necessary?
There's 3 doors currently. One would be absolutely needed in the front for access, but then also one in the kitchen. The third one was kind of an optional. That dollar figure is fairly minor. But the biggest thing is bringing the utilities over. And I think the biggest discrepancy that Matt and I had was the lateral for the sewer. After discussing with Braden, I don't have that dollar figure, but I can get it to you if you'd like to look at it. I have a breakdown. I have a breakdown of my numbers that I used. But the biggest thing is the 20% contingency really threw a fairly decent dollar figure on top of what the estimate was. Just for a safety factor on what I've experienced seeing the depot project, different little change orders come here and there. I figured that I'd rather be safe than sorry and put $150,000 as the, in his earlier discussions, he had estimated between $70,000 and $80,000 to white box the facility. I don't know where his numbers came from, but he did email me yesterday to see if we couldn't sit down and go over the numbers. But I haven't had that opportunity to meet with him.
That's what I would like to see, and I think that's what he wants to see. And I promised him that I would bring that up tonight and try to get you guys together before we get to a point where it's too late and can't do anything. I mean, if it is what you say it is, and we can't do it, either he's going to have to come up with a different plan, or he's going to have to rethink his investment. So.
Well, I'd really hate for an opportunity like that to just dissolve.
No,
Annie, I took it when you asked the question earlier about economic development, this is what you're talking about.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. And I know that would, at the figure of $150,000, it would deplete that balance drastically. But if it's something we feel strongly about and think that it would be a good thing for us to do, developmental, economic-wise,
one thing with that fund is we've been pretty consistent in going to the Economic Development Board and asking for their input on that, and been pretty consistent on taking their advice. But I had the same note written down.
Did you?
That's one that we could look at. But I think from the conversation I had with Matt, they're willing to pick up some of that cost for the white boxing. So that needs to enter into that figure too.
Yeah, and I think there's some discussion to be had too as time goes on, that the Friends of the Depot is trying to figure out where their fundraising efforts are, where our final costs are on the main depot project, and if they have a balance left over, and how they can work that with other projects down there.
And I know that they have other projects even within the great room
Yes.
that they would like to do with different, different seating and awnings and different things within the great room. But I also know that they would like to see, someone succeed in the former Greer's spot. I don't know what that means to them money-wise, if they'd be willing to help contribute to that. Don was here, but I've never had that conversation.
Well, and
with
he
him.
has some other spots that he'd like to develop out for other things too. But
Correct. And this is just a thought. I haven't, potentially could condominiumize the north end and sell it off to him. I don't know how that would work necessarily, but there is that option. There's probably some hoops to jump through, but
Well, if I get a little woozy here, it's because when that was mentioned to a staff member before, that's not here, that's no longer employed with the city, it was, Mayor, we can't do that, the federal government paid for our roof.
oh,
That was the end of it.
condominiumized, I think, still allows us to maintain what I think that we'd have to check with the
we'd still
DOT.
retain ownership of the outside of the building, so that would be where I would have a little bit of a discrepancy with that statement, but.
Well, I have total discrepancy with that statement. How long can a federal agency hold a gun to your head because they put a roof on your
Depends
building
on,
30
it
years
depends on
ago?
what building they did and what kind of
That's what I said,
clawbacks they
depends
have
on
on
what
it.
federal agency it is.
It sounds like we have a lot of options, really, and I'm really optimistic about somehow I think we should be able to do that, to be able to white box it, with whether it's a combination of all these efforts or even, the other options.
As far as the white boxing numbers go, I feel fairly confident that I would rather prefer my numbers over
Yeah.
over a lower number.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it couldn't be done for less than 150, but for a budgetary device, I would be nervous about inserting, 110, 120,000, and then doing the project and then being partway through it and realizing that you have a shortfall.
I agree, but there's some, like I said, there's some things he's willing to do that was part of what you were expressing that you would do or that the city would do. So, so there could be a change in that budget. The numbers would be the same, but who pays for it is where the.
I think
where the change
we
would
need to
be.
hear back from you. I would imagine that he's gonna be reaching out to you here within the next couple of days.
He
So
did.
he did.
He did last night at about 8:30, but I didn't
Right.
respond to it till this
Okay,
morning.
okay.
So I wasn't available. I had a couple meetings today and then this. So
Yeah.
no, I was hoping tomorrow or early next week I could have a conversation with him.
I think that you need to have a discussion amongst all of you as to your general willingness to fund a project like this, and just to make sure that all of your thoughts are heard on that too. To me, I'm hearing general support, but I don't hear full support, so I think you need to work through how you're talking about that part too.
I'm willing to let them have their conversation in here.
I'm willing to hear it.
But that's,
So, and I want, before I can support it or argue any further, I want to know those answers to what I've already said. I mean, if we're back to 70 or 80,000, there may be a funding source that we can come up with for that. It's just the idea that, when you have momentum going in a development like that, I just hate to see this lose that momentum. But I don't want to spend more money than we can spend either, so.
Okay.
did they find why the roof was leaking? Did they get that?
Brockway was up there. With all the ice and water on there currently, they couldn't ascertain why. After Braden and I talked about it, we went and looked at it. we honestly think that there was moisture in the roof before it was redone, and with the new HVAC system coming online, we think that it actually melted the moisture that was already in the existing crack.
I see.
But we'll hold the subcontractor and the contractor who put the roof up to make sure that it's corrected if there in fact is an actual real issue. We probably won't be able to determine that really until spring.
Thank you, sir.
I had one other thing I wanted to bring up.
Yes, sir.
The 75,000 that we feel we're going to be short in the Recplex. I think in the future, it was brought up to us as they were making the sales pitch for the indoor Recplex, that they were there was a willingness on the part of the local hotels and motels to do a voluntary destination surcharge on hotel motel fees. I don't know why it wouldn't be appropriate for us to ask that be a part of their plan as well. I mean, Burlington stepped up many years ago and took this project on, and to the betterment of those facilities, to a significant betterment of those facilities. And I don't think it would be inappropriate of us to at least ask if that's how they plan to do that funding to help with this, I think, rather minor shortfall in our budget. And it's been a bone of contention for people, even though it's been, pretty minor. I don't think it would have to ask.
Problem with that.
That's all I get.
Those will all be fun discussions.
There are a lot of these little issues.
I just would like to say, I mentioned community field, with the 45,000 we have in there in hotel motel for stuff. It is just utilities and then their association fee that amounts to $6,300 a year. That I was thinking three things, and it's just because we have three line items. We have light and power in one line item, and heating and fuel in a second one. So,
That's it.
but otherwise, I don't have anything else, and hopefully have a good weekend. And anyone has comments, let the council know.
That's right, just want to throw that out there again. If you do have any comments over tonight's work session, please send us an email. Let us know right away what your thoughts are on this meeting. We'd love to hear from you, but again, I'm telling you, don't wait till the midnight hour.
Yeah, I'll be in bed.
There's nothing else?
Good night. Good night.
Thank you very much.